In 1958, a black man named James Monroe was arrested for taking the life of a white man that he never met. He was falsely accused by the wife of the victim, who made the entire story up to cover for her and her lover that she was having an affair with. But James Monroe's case is very important because what happened to James Monroe is the reason why black people can sue the police in federal court for violating their civil rights. For over 90 years, the Supreme Court refused to let black people sue cops in federal court. It did this despite the fact that Congress passed a law in 1871 saying that black people could. But something changed in 1961. And you could thank the Chicago Police Department's record of brutalizing and mistreating black people that made the Supreme Court do a sudden reversal. The case of Monroe versus Pape is the most important case in police misconduct and civil rights law. It involved a black family, the Monroes, and a white cop named Frank Pape. Frank Pape joined the CPD in 1933 and quickly rose through the ranks. Pape and his crew of cops were known for their aggressive policing. They secured over 800 convictions, sent 5 men to the electric chair, and were involved in over 23 firefights. He had no love for Chicago's growing black population. Frank Pape was the John Burge of his era. In fact, he might have been worse than John Burge. This all began on October 27, 1958, when 38-year-old Peter Sacy came home from work to the home he shared with his wife and his 3 kids. Minutes later, he ended up losing his life in his basement after someone fired at him, striking him in the head. Chief of Detectives Frank Pape went to the scene with his crew of cops and learned from the wife, Mary Sacy, that she saw 2 young black men confront her husband in their home. She said that these 2 young black men then told her to go upstairs, and then she heard firing from the basement. 50 officers began going through the black community, harassing every black person they could find as they tried to find these attackers. But Frank Pape started to think that the wife was lying because her story did not add up. There was a lot of cash that was left in the home after the attackers left that could have been taken, and there was no sign of forced entry. Sensing that the police were not buying her story, the wife agreed to come to the police station to look at mugshots. After pretending that she was studying each photo, she settled on the photo of James Monroe, a black father of 6. The police were relieved by this identification because now Frank Pape and the police had somebody they could blame this crime on, and that person was James Monroe. On October 29, 1958, with no arrest warrant and no search warrant, Frank Pape and 12 officers came to the Monroe's home at 5:45 in the morning. James and his family were awakened out of the bed. They threatened to fire at James if he didn't get up. They then dragged Mrs. Monroe, who was naked, into the living room. Frank Pape and the officers then proceeded to beat James Monroe in front of his wife and his children as they watched and screamed. One of the officers even kicked James's 4-year-old son. James was then arrested and taken to the police station where he was held and beaten some more. The next day, Mary Sacy came to the police station to identify James in the lineup, but she pretended to faint twice while looking at the black men who were in the lineup behind the one-way glass. Because she was lying about the entire thing, she was unable to identify James again in the lineup. James Monroe was released. A month later, the police learned that Mary had made the entire story up. It was Mary and their lover that committed this crime in an attempt to collect on her husband's insurance policy. The Monroes and the ACLU filed a lawsuit against Frank Pape and his crew of officers for abusing their civil rights. They sued under Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act of 1871. Initially, their case was dismissed. When they appealed it to the U.S. Supreme Court, the court said that the kind of brutality that the Chicago Police Department was engaging in necessitated that citizens be able to sue police officers in federal court. Now, you have to understand, this was stunning at the time because the court had said no for over 90 years. But because of the abuse that the Chicago police was inflicting on black people and black communities, the court said that this had to change course. The court ordered that the Monroe's case go to trial. The Monroe's case was tried before a federal judge, James D. Parsons. He was the first black person appointed to a federal district court in the entire country. On December 4, 1962, Frank Pape and his crew of officers were found liable for abusing the Monroe civil rights in order to pay $13,000. Frank Pape will leave the police department, but he returned in 1965. He was later made commander of the police district in Chicago's Black Englewood neighborhood. He died in the year 2000. We recently learned about a squad of officers that were convicted in federal court for abusing the rights of 2 black men. They called themselves the Goon Squad. As I always say, injustice against black people is not new. We're seeing the same injustice being rehearsed over and over and over again. Whether it be by the Goon Squad in Mississippi or by Frank Pape and John Burge in Chicago, black people and black communities have continually been targeted for unconstitutional policing and policing practices. For too long, policing has been intertwined with racial terror because in order to gain maximum control over black people, it was essential for terror to become law because the law needed racial terror and the racial terror needed the law. And unfortunately, we are still seeing the same things occurring today. Goon squads are still harming and targeting black people and black communities. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think about what happened to the Monroe family 60 years ago? And what do you think about the fact that we are still seeing goon squads targeting black communities almost 60 years later? Drop a comment down below and let me know what you think.